laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, good evening to you. Now it's crunch time for Rishi Sunak. Will he get his Rwanda bill passed tonight or not? And if not, what next? Also, very tragically, an asylum seeker has been found dead aboard the Bibi Stockholm after apparently taking his own life. Is it time now for that barge to close? And 4 years to the day, isn't it, that the Tories won their massive election victory. If you put your cross in the box for the Tories, how happy are you with the way that things have panned out? And a row has broken out about a wannabe Green Party MP who wants to be referred to as a woman, but who the Tory deputy chair for women retweeted a description of as basically a man in a wig. Should we be compelled to describe people as women just because they ask us to? And get this right, over in France, a new plan would see parents whose children have committed crimes have to carry out community service. Good idea or not? Should we follow suit? Yes, indeed, I'll have debate on all of that to come over the next hour. But first, let's cross live to Polly Middlehurst for tonight's latest news headlines.
Michelle, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, the top story from the GB newsroom tonight is that the co-chairs of a group of Conservative MPs have said they cannot vote for the government's new Rwanda bill on its second reading tonight. That's after 8 MPs representing the DUP in Northern Ireland earlier said they're considering voting against Rishi Sunak's plan. It would swell the numbers opposed to the Safety of Rwanda bill and mean even fewer Tory MPs will be needed to defeat the government. Well, the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, has argued that both Parliament and the British people support the initiative.
This government is stopping the boats. Arrivals are down by a third this year as illegal entries are on the rise elsewhere in Europe.
Well, the Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper told the House of Commons in the same session that the Rwanda asylum scheme is simply a mess.
We've just got total Tory chaos.
Yeah.
What a fine mess this week Prime Minister has got them all into and got the country into as well. Tearing lumps out of each other over a failing policy while they let the country down. We've had a Home Secretary sacked, an Immigration Minister resigning, and they've spent almost £300 million of taxpayers' money on Rwanda without sending a single person, and the Home Secretary seemed to confirm today that, in fact, that is £400 million.
Meanwhile, Downing Street today has said that migrants living on board the controversial Bibi Stockholm barge in Dorset have had to be assessed for emotional trauma. It follows the death of an asylum seeker on board who's understood to have taken his own life. His body was removed from the vessel earlier. The Home Secretary promised the incident will be fully investigated. The first asylum seekers were brought back onto the vessel in October. Serial baby killer Lucy Letby has been stripped of her nursing credentials after a panel ordered her to be struck off the register. Letby had told the Nursing and Midwifery Council she didn't object to losing her credentials but said she maintained her innocence. In August, the 33-year-old was sentenced to 14 whole-life orders after she was convicted of the murders of 7 babies and the attempted murders of 6 others. The head of Thames Water has told MPs the company doesn't have enough money to cover its ballooning debts. The UK's biggest water supplier has £1.35 billion of external debt to support, with the first £190 million due in repayments next year. It comes days after interim bosses said immediate and radical action was needed to secure the company's financial future. More wet weather's on the way, with forecasts for hail, thunder and potential flooding. Yellow weather warnings in place for south east Scotland and north east England, to cover central Scotland as well until the early hours of tomorrow morning. It follows a weekend of washouts, with Storm Ellen and Storm Fergus sweeping across the country, causing widespread disruption. A homeless charity today has been joined by a surprise royal guest at their Christmas party dinner. Prince William joined volunteers at the Passage charity to help serve their annual festive meal to those the homeless charity supports. Posting on X, they offered a special thank you to the future king for his encouragement and indeed his inspiration. That's the news on GB News, across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Thank you very much for that, Polly. Well, I am Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, the Deputy Leader of Reform UK, Ben Habib, and the contributing editor of Novara Media, Michael Walker. Good evening to both of you. You know the drill as well on this programme, don't you? It's not just about us. It's very much about you guys at home. What's on your mind tonight? You can get in touch all the usual ways. gbviews@gbnews.com is how you email me, or you can tweet me at GBNews. By the way, I do try and read all of my emails as best as I can. Obviously not whilst I'm live on air, there's too many. But I did notice in my inbox on my way home last night, Madeline, you sent me a message yesterday saying it was your birthday and you asked me to wish you happy birthday. I'm really sorry I didn't see it last night, but I'll do so tonight instead. You also went on to say that Ben Habib was your favourite panellist.
Oh, wow.
What a happy birthday present to Madeline. And whilst I'm at it, saying thank you to people, look at this. Thank you very much, Zoe, for sending me in that bauble. Can you see it? She's made a bauble of me. How many people? Oh, well, not a bauble, is it? It's a Christmas tree decoration. How many people can say they've been turned into a Christmas tree decoration? It's got my spectacles on it. It's got red lipstick and everything. Thank you very much, dear viewers. I appreciate it very much. Also, as well, lots of you get in touch with me and ask me about Nick Brown. You say to me, why is nobody ever asking what's going on with the former chief whip, very high-profile guy in politics? You say, why is no one digging into that story? And I always tell you that I've tried digging into it multiple times to find out what's going on, to no avail. Anyway, there was an update, of course, today from Nick Brown's lawyers to say that he is not going to stand at the next election. He's also not going to continue within the Labour Party when it comes to his membership. He says lots of really interesting things. I'll implore you all to have a look at that. But basically, he has no trust and faith in the investigation process within Labour. And he says things have reached a very sorry pass when the likely next party of government conducts cases of this gravity in a manner more akin to those of a mismanaged golf club. Cool, blimey, it's a corker of a letter, you know. I'd advise you all to cast your eye over it. Anyway, today is a massive day, isn't it, for Rishi Sunak's government. They had a lovely breakfast this morning, apparently smoked salmon, if that is your thing. And the day has continued on and on. 7 o'clock is the crunch time vote for Sunak, of course, on the basis of this Rwanda bill. Should we cross live to Christopher Hope to get the very latest on where we are with that? Christopher, good evening to you. Bring our viewers up to speed with exactly what we're expecting tonight. And there's been a lot of goings on today that will impact the way people vote. Tell us more.
Yes, well, it wasn't, I'm afraid to say, I know you like your smoked salmon, Dewbs, it was actually bacon butties for breakfast for the Prime Minister offered. A group of 20 backbenchers, the New Conservatives, went to see him around 8 a.m. this morning. They're one of the so-called five families of Tory groupings on the right of the party. They're being wooed by whips by the government to try and bring them round to make sure they support this Rwanda plan. The left of the party, the One Nation caucus, met last night. They approve it. They are relaxed about the measures that's being pushed forward here by the Prime Minister to try and get these flights taking off from the UK, taking migrants who arrive here illegally to be processed in Rwanda. This bill said that Rwanda is a safe country, is meant to reassure ensure courts that anyone's taken there will not be returned to where they may have been fleeing from. That's the idea, and that's why they think they're going to work from their point of view. But the Tories on the right, again, these so-called the five-family group of right-wingers, they feel it's not enough. To stop the boats, you've got to be much firmer with the Human Rights Act, be much firmer with European courts. If the PM goes too far down that route, he loses the support of the left. It's not easy. The PM is balancing these two competing interests in his party. Now, what's happening right now is these groups of Tory right-wings are meeting right now. We're expecting a statement within about 45 minutes when they might indicate what their plan is. It's likely they will say that we can't support the bill, but they may not oppose it. Opposing it is the nuclear option for an MP here. They might well lose the whip. They could even bring down the government, because what could happen if the bill is voted down? Labour would probably propose a vote of no confidence this week in the government, which the government would probably win, but would limp into Christmas very, very damaged. If they lose that vote of no confidence, of course, there'll be an election probably in February. There is a lot to play for. Politics is never boring. If nothing else, I think Brexit has given Parliament its voice back. All power is now residing in Westminster, in Whitehall, in Parliament, and that's made the stakes much higher than before.
Interesting stuff, Christopher Hope. Thank you for that update, especially for clarifying it was bacon, not salmon. Very important point. Thank you very much. Enjoy the next hour or so. Fascinating insight. Look, right, there's all these talk about these five families, this group's going to meet and do this group's going to meet and do that, this other group's going to meet and do this. Are people just a little bit too jumped up? Shouldn't they just vote the way that their boss essentially tells them to?
No, I think they should vote in accordance with what their conscience tells them, based on what they think is right for the country. And, you know, this is the problem with the Conservative Party. It is, as you've very succinctly portrayed, Michelle, a schism of various different groupings and, you know, various schisms of different groupings. And the One Nation lot, who probably would prefer smoked salmon to bacon butties, you know, on the sort of anti-Rwanda because they find Rwanda offensive, and then what you might call the common sense group in the ERG, anti the Rwanda bill because they don't think it actually does what it purports to do on the tin. And if they don't think that that's the case, then they should vote against it. And they should signal to the nation that actually the Prime Minister, which in my view is what's going on, is trying to hoodwink us. Frankly, as you know from previous shows, I think the whole Rwanda policy is a bit of a hoodwink. No number of people going to Rwanda is going to deter people from making that journey across to the UK. Because if you've made the journey from North Africa into Europe, you've made that arduous, much more arduous journey across the Mediterranean. You've then walked across half of Europe in order to get to Calais. You've paid people smugglers for the opportunity to get to the fantastic treatment that we give them in the United Kingdom. Yeah. You're not going to be put off by the small chance of the hopeless British judicial system somehow taking you to Rwanda.
But you don't
You'll
know
run that gauntlet.
You're speculating that these people that are they're choosing the UK. You're very right in what you're saying. They're going through a variety of countries. They're spending however much money because their final destination of choice is this country. So no one really knows with any certainty that actually, if you could potentially find yourself, you know, shoved over there to that country, no one really, I would say, would be a deterrent.
But I tell you what's more fanciful is to think Rwanda would work. To presume it would work and spend £300 million chasing it down.
Oh, yeah, but £300 million, everyone says, oh, £300 million this and £300 million that. That's barely what? How many days of that is 8 million? Do the maths, you're a smart businessman. It's what, just over a month or so, is it?
Yeah, it's a much, yeah,
what,
but...
What?
Yeah, but at full tilt, it's only 4,000 that go to Rwanda. At full tilt, that's it.
Where are you on all this?
I think we agree on this point, which is that this nonsense which is going on here, I think of it as a soap opera. You know, Mark Francois wants a bit more time in front of a TV camera, so he sort of says, I might rebel, and then we don't know if he will or not. But Rwanda, the reason why it won't work is, yes, because court documents have suggested only 200 people would be sent a year. As you've said, people have already taken a massive risk to get here. That would count as a sort of 1% risk that you might get sent to Rwanda. Now, there's no one who is going to have made that journey but will be deterred by a 1% risk of being sent to Rwanda. So the whole policy is a bit of a joke. I think Rishi Sunak put it forward because he thought it made him seem tough on migration. In fact, it just makes him seem like he's completely out of his depth because this won't stop any boats. I would also object, to you saying we treat them fabulously when they get here.
We do.
Well, obviously... No,
10 times more fabulously than the French.
But the point I think is relevant here is that there is someone who has lost their life today who was on the Bibi Stockholm. We think they took their own life. So I think the idea that these people are all getting treated fabulously, what most people who arrive in Britain want to do is have their decision made quickly, get on and get a job, and what we're doing is we're keeping them in limbo for months and years on end because the Home Office is completely dysfunctional.
But, Sue, I mean, let's just pick up on this very tragic death within, the Bibi Stockholm. Suicide, and this is awful, it really saddens me, all this stuff, but suicide is apparently the biggest killer of men under the age of 50. In this country alone. When you look at various different stats, apparently there's one suicide every 90 minutes. This is absolutely a monumental issue. So I do find it quite interesting that the tragic death of this person aboard the Bibi Stockholm, none of us know the ins and outs, none of us know the reasons why, but already people are therefore saying it's because of the government, it's the government's fault, it's because this person has been put aboard this accommodation. Nobody knows that.
Yeah, I mean, we should always be careful when talking about any one individual suicide about attributing motives.
Yeah, but you just brought it up. Well, you brought it up in response to the way that we're treating asylum seekers. Well,
because I think we were speaking carelessly there about how they are spoken about. Well, I think to say they are treated fabulously. Now, I don't think necessarily we can say, oh, this person definitely committed suicide for this reason. But it is relevant, I think, that just this summer there were hundreds of people on the Bibi Stockholm who sort of sent a letter to the government saying how distressing it was being there, and many people had considered committing suicide. We know that actually there was someone who attempted suicide after they'd found out that they were going to be sent to the Bibi
But people make a proactive choice to come here, don't they? I mean, they can't all expect 4-star hotels. I mean, come on now.
Well, so what I think we should be doing is processing people very quickly. So I think the idea that we're putting up tens of thousands of people in hotels is completely bizarre. I think that's a complete failure of government. But what we should be doing is making a decision so people can either go back because they haven't got a right to stay here, or they can get on with their lives and become productive members of society.
But just going back to the point about treating them fabulously, the French, on average, spend £5,000 per annum per illegal migrant. We spend £50,000 per annum per head, and that is 10 times as generous. And, of course, we do have lots of...
Is it 10 times as generous, or is it 10 times more incompetent, right? Because the fact is, most people, when they arrive here, what they want to do is they want to get on with life. They want to get a job, they want to start living a normal life. They don't want to be held up in a hotel, right? That's not what they've asked for. That's what the government has resorted to because we haven't process their claims in time.
The implication of what you're saying is that we should have a completely open border, let people come in and get a job.
No.
But you've got to hold them somewhere while you determine.
Yeah, but you can
once they land on your shores, which they should never do, in my opinion, in the first place. But once they're on your shores, you've got to have them in a holding pattern until you determine the integrity of their case.
And then it can take a month, or it can take 2 years, and it happens to be the case that in this country it takes a couple of years because we've defunded the Home Office. I mean, it is taking way, way longer to process anyone's asylum claim in this country than elsewhere in Europe. And we don't take more asylum seekers than France. France takes more asylum seekers than we do. So the idea that we're somehow overwhelmed by the number of people coming is misleading. It seems to be that there is some sort of government failure elsewhere.
You know, I think there's a fine line between what is a genuine asylum seeker and what is an economic migrant. And I listened then to what you were saying about, these people, they want to get here and then they want to get on with life and get a job. I would have thought that these people, if they're genuinely being apparently persecuted and they felt unsafe apparently in France, and I would have thought that their first primary desire was to feel safe. When I hear things like people's primary desire is to get a job, which I don't knock, by the way, who wouldn't want to progress their life and get a job and earn money and all that.
I don't think those two things are inconsistent.
It makes me ponder whether or not they're economic migrants or asylum seekers. Anyway, Michael says that's not inconsistent. You guys, what do you make to it all at home? Also, as well, let me take you back in time. 4 years ago to the day, can you believe it's that long ago now? Boris Johnson, of course, won a stonking majority. Did you vote for him? And if so, how do you feel 4 years on? Do you go, yes, I made the right decision? Or do you go, what a mess? You tell me.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels we're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Dewbs & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Hello there, Michelle Dewberry, keeping you company until 7 o'clock tonight. I don't want to get all diva-ish on you or anything like that, you know, but it's a miracle that I'm still here to keep you company till 7 o'clock, because I wish I could show you the tea. I mean, I don't think I can. The tea that I have been served. Can you... Oh, I'm spilling it now. Can you see the colour? I've never seen anything like it. I'm going to get a tea colour chart up. That is not... It's not good, is it?
Well, I think we should have champagne. I don't understand what's going on.
Oh, I mean, in Parliament, they get salmon stroke, bacon butties in here. I mean, I don't even know what that was. But anyway, Ben Habib is alongside me. Michael Walker remains too. Howard says, where was the outcry when people like oil workers lived on the Bibi Stockholm? Did they get assessed for emotional trauma due to their so-called living accommodation? Margaret says...
They did double the capacity, which I think is relevant there.
That is a very good point. Margaret says, why don't we press now for the introduction of ID cards? Is that something that you would support, guys? Peter says, how on earth do you actually speed up asylum applications when many people have no documentation? What do you do? What would that look like? Right, let's ask...
Well, we know what that looks like, because they just wave them through. They wave them through. They did that earlier this year in order to expedite 12,000 applications.
Yes, there was an amnesty, wasn't there?
There was an amnesty, yeah.
Yes, you're very across your facts. I like that. Right, let's talk, shall we? Politics, because do you know, I can't believe it, it's 4 years to the day since the last election. I ran in it, so I'll never forget it, quite frankly. Anyway, of course, the Tories did indeed get a stonking majority of over 80 seats, as it was then. Were you somebody that voted for them? Did they deliver? Have they delivered so far on what you wanted them to? Sandy says, I won't vote for the Tories ever again unless Boris Johnson is their leader. Wowzers. George says, I voted Conservative 4 years ago because they promised Brexit. Since then, not only do we not have a proper Brexit, we don't have a proper Conservative government. Massive mistake voting for Boris, the fake champion of the red wall, says Richard. Susan says, I feel very disappointed. I did vote Tories, but it's all been squandered, she says. Ben.
Well, Susan and Richard are spot on. You know, when Boris won his 80-seat majority, he won it in no small part because the Brexit Party stood down 317 candidates against the Tories, and we all thought this was now going to be at least 2 terms of Conservative government. Actually, he became famous as the only Prime Minister in history not only to be evicted within 3 years of taking office after such a thumping majority, but to be hounded out of the Commons itself. I don't think there's a Prime Minister in history who has that record. And what he's left is a legacy of complete disaster. So anyone who's still labouring under the illusion that Boris Johnson was some kind of Churchillian figure, you know, taking the United Kingdom forward, you know, with aspiration and enthusiasm and ambition, is very mistaken. He was a hopeless leader for this country, and the evidence is all there. And as some of your text pointed out, he didn't get Brexit done as he said he would. He promised that the country would leave the EU as one United Kingdom. We didn't. We left Northern Ireland behind. He promised us that we would take control of our laws, our borders, our fish. We haven't. We are still hitched at the hip with the EU in very important policy areas: state aid, competition, environment, this inexorable march towards net zero, and employment. We're committed through the deal that he did to stay in the European Convention of Human Rights. I know it has nothing to do with the EU, but that's the commitment we made in his trade agreement.
And that's one of the things that people are arguing about, essentially, in that Rwanda deal. Oh, nice. That was a burst of applause there. If you're listening on the radio, wondering what on earth was going on. Michael, where are you on it all?
Well, I mean, he did get Brexit done. I don't think a harder Brexit would have put Britain in a better situation. But I mean, I think the biggest failure for Boris Johnson was levelling up. I mean, what was his big message when it came to 2019? It was, one, yes, get Brexit done. Yes, Brexit has got done. Although, by the way, I do remember it looked like a very expensive advertising campaign. I think Saatchi, which was all over Google and YouTube for days, which was give Boris Johnson a big majority and politics will end. Are you sick of arguments? Then get the Tories in. Then what we had is 3 prime ministers over a very short period of time because they just fought like rats in a sack anyway. But yeah, I think levelling up will be where, you know, he really failed on a policy issue. What he said is, we will spread the wealth around Britain. I was looking at Bloomberg today. They say, actually, regional inequality has increased since 2019. So the gap between the productivity of workers in London and the workers elsewhere, now, of course, that's not a feature of the workers themselves, it's what they're working with, has grown since the Tories came to power. So they've done the opposite of levelling up.
But then some would say, actually, they've sacked off a lot of the HS2, which people can debate whether or not they agree with that. But on the basis that actually you take a lot of that money and you invest it in the regions, particularly in things like infrastructure. So will that help?
I mean, the proof is in the pudding, isn't it? I mean, I would have gone for HS2 and then built a HS3. I think we should be investing shed loads of money in having a high-quality rail network in this country. I think the idea that we start planning stuff and then cancelling them all the time is a bit of a mistake. And I also think it's difficult to say that cancelling the bit of HS2 that went from Birmingham to Manchester and Leeds counts as levelling up. I don't really see the logic there. So I would have said what the Tories should have done is put the money where their mouth is and properly invest around the UK. They seem to have forgotten about it.
Well, you can be the judge of that at home. Do you feel that your area is levelled up? And I'm always fascinated by this. What does levelling up mean to you? Would you be happy if house prices were levelled up? I don't know, your houses started to cost the same as houses in London, for example. Would you want a piece of that pie or not? Let me know your thoughts on that. But I also, before I finish my politics chat, I do want to ask you about this issue. It's caught my eye. There's a row that's been breaking out about the MP, Rachel Maclean. She's also the deputy chair in the Tory party for women. She's come under fire now, basically, for saying a Green Party candidate who refers to themselves as a trans woman. She retweeted this tweet, basically, which described this person as essentially a man who wears a wig and calls himself a proud lesbian. I have to say that Rachel did go on, apparently, to delete that tweet and issue an apology. Well, the potential or aspirational MP in question went onto the BBC to respond to that tweet. Let's have a look and a listen.
Without a shadow of a doubt, it is a transphobic comment. It's dog whistling at the finest, you know. It's gaslighting, it's everything. By attacking a minority group, it's just, yeah, you know, it's just...
I don't mean to be rude or disrespectful, but what I find gaslighting is me being expected to call that person a woman. Ben Habib, where are you?
Well, I'm completely behind Rachel Maclean, and I wouldn't have deleted the tweet. I mean, he's clearly a man. He's clearly wearing a wig. And, I mean, he's not a lesbian. I suppose there's an error there. He's not a lesbian. He's heterosexual. He's a man dressed up as a woman, and he still fancies women.
See, I'm just showing on the screen what a woman is and the difference between a woman and a trans woman. Both deserve respect and freedom to live their lives, but it's not transphobic to say they're not the same thing. Nor does it assist policymakers across healthcare, education and the CGS to pretend that they are. Michael, where are you on this?
Well, I mean, I think the reason she's apologised is because what she said was quite rude. I mean, I think
she didn't say that. She retweeted what someone else said.
I think it is rude. I mean, I think as a society, we're yet to have really sort of come to any kind of consensus on this. Now, I have trans friends who have lived in their, chosen gender for a very long time, and I think to call them, if they're a trans woman, to call them a man would be very offensive. Now,
but they are men. You do appreciate that.
I don't actually agree with that. I do think there is a fundamental difference between a man and a trans woman. I don't think a trans woman is just a man who thinks they're a woman. I think there is something very fundamental there. I think the point at which we decide someone is treated as a woman or when they're a trans woman is something that we still haven't quite found a consensus on. I think when it comes to sports, when it comes to prisons, it's totally reasonable for people to have a debate about that. I think most people agree that we'll use the pronoun someone wants.
I don't think it is reasonable to have a debate.
Anyone else?
I don't think it's a debatable issue. I think if you're a man, you're a man. If you're biologically a man, you're a man. You may have gender dysmorphia. You may be suffering a psychological problem, a psychiatric issue with the way you identify yourself. But that doesn't make you a woman.
So I think
it's not debatable.
There's differences within. No, there is differences within the scientific community here because people have you can scan brains and say that actually trans women, you can sort of tell that they're not the same as a cis man, for example. So there is a physiological thing going on. But also, I think the way you're sort of talking about it, they're not women. It's just a mental health problem. Which essentially seems to be what you're saying. Yeah, but that's. Yeah. I mean, people said similar things about gay people in the past, right? So I do think that our understanding of this is. At this point, still quite primitive, still quite basic, and we need to keep an open mind about this, which I don't think you're really showing.
No,
I mean, you're not a doctor.
It's not a matter of. It's not a matter of keeping an open mind.
I actually think that affirming people's sort of choices and desires when it comes to gender is the best case for them. And then sort of, if someone has taken that transition, to then just call them the other sex, I think is
no. Look. I think his name was Michael, he's now Melissa. If Michael wants
No, it was, in April 2022, this person ran as Matty
Matty, sorry, not Michael.
This was in April 22.
Yeah, so Matty now wants to be called Melissa. That's fine by me, I'll call him Melissa. But for me to have to recognise him as a woman is intellectually and biologically daft. It's challenging the English language to the point where it becomes meaningless on how you communicate. There's no such thing as a man who has all his biological parts as a man becoming a woman. It just doesn't happen.
Well, this person apparently reckons that they began to transition last year. But you see, because I know you're sympathetic to this, we've had conversations off-air, deep, quite long conversations off-air about this, but I always ponder this, because to me, not you, but when we get into that, when I look at that and that person's telling me I'm a woman, essentially I'm the same as you, Michelle, I think it's delusion, and I think it's untrue. And then I ask myself, well, where is the line here? Where is the level? If that person, or, well, not that person, I don't want to make it specific, if a grown adult man in his head feels like he's a child, would we go along with that and allow that person to attend a school?
Well, I think what that comparison misses is that there is something which the medical establishment has recognised, which is gender dysphoria, which lots of people experience. It's not just sort of one in a few thousand.
Is that a mental health condition?
That's what I volunteered up. That's what I volunteered up.
It's an experience.
But hold on, just help me understand it. I'm seeking to understand. Is that a mental health condition, what you're describing?
Well, there's disagreement about that. So I think it's an experience that people have. It's a diagnosis that people give someone, but I think mental health condition comes with some prior assumptions that either it's negative or it's abnormal.
Well,
so, for example,
homosexuality
used to be considered a mental health condition. So I can see why trans people don't want gender dysphoria to be a mental health condition, because it seems that you are in some way, not normal. And obviously, it's a minority group. But I think it's an experience which is just as valid as everyone else.
Look,
and the medical establishment recognises that.
But, Michael, I've got great sympathy with people who are not comfortable in their bodies. I get it. They're not comfortable, I get it. But that doesn't make them a woman. Just because they want to
doesn't
be a
make them the
woman
same as a
doesn't
cis
make them a
woman, but they
woman.
are a trans woman.
Oh, I hate this word cis woman.
I don't know what cis
completely
means.
reject this
It just means
notion.
not trans. It's the same way
But
that
hold on,
straight means not gay.
Why should I be referred to now as a cis woman to accommodate this group of men that have suddenly decided that they are a woman?
Well,
I mean...
Well, see, I think that's a very loaded way of putting that. I don't think trans women are just men who've decided to be women. I think trans women tend to be, men who've experienced gender dysphoria, can't really be happy other than by transitioning, and then so sort of framing it as a choice, I think, is somewhat problematic. When it comes to cis and trans, I mean, when it was the case that gay people were allowed to get married, the idea, it's not a straight marriage, it's just a marriage. Well, just a way of saying it's not a gay marriage, right? It's just when we have new categories, you're going to have to make a few more.
No, I don't want, all of a sudden, I am a woman, I'm a biological woman, and I just reject this notion that now I've got
What
to
are you
have
losing
a
by that being...
as a grip on reality.
Yeah,
there is a basic grip on reality when someone now has to put this new label on
Someone
a
could have said
biological
exactly the same thing
female.
about weddings, to say sort of the idea that you've got a straight wedding. No, weddings are between a man and a woman. So saying there's gay weddings and straight weddings, I'm not accepting
Nobody gets harmed, do they? No one gets hurt by who marries who.
But who gets harmed by being called a cis man or a cis woman?
When you have men declaring themselves as women and then arguing for access to, for example, safe single-sex spaces, then to me it becomes a concern.
Or women-only prisons, or wanting to go into women's
So I'm
loos.
agreeing with you that there is a policy debate to have when it comes to sports and prisons. But what I'm saying is that when it comes to language, I don't see why we can't just be a bit more relaxed about this than you both seem to be.
I'm not relaxed.
Very different opinions, all of them are equally valid, and I want to throw it open to you at home. What is your view on it all? I want to talk to you after the break about whether or not parents who allow, or whose children commit criminal activity, should it be the parents that are on the hook for doing things like community service? That's what they're planning in France. Don't forget as well, we've got that huge Rwanda bill vote coming up at 7. We'll have the latest on that as well. Don't go anywhere.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, Michelle Dewberry with you till 7. Deputy Leader of Reform UK, Ben Habib, alongside me, as is a contributing editor of Novara Media, Michael Walker. Beverly on Twitter says, for goodness sake, you guys, stop Boris bashing. Can't spit that out then. She says, he came to power in 2019, December. And she says, almost immediately a pandemic hit and he didn't get a chance. Leave him alone, she says. What do you make to that? Now, let's talk about parents, basically how much responsibility they should have when it comes to the acts of their children, because over in France, I found this quite interesting, plans on foot there. What they're suggesting, of course, you'll be familiar perhaps with the fact there's been quite a lot of rioting over there. And French ministers now, some would say very controversially, they were blaming single-parent families. And they're suggesting that actually the parents, if your children commit criminal acts, that you, the parent, would be on the hook for it, essentially, and have to carry out community service. What would you make to that, Ben Habib?
So I think there are a couple of things going on over here. The knee-jerk reaction of adolescents, and I don't think they're talking about children, they're talking about sort of, 15 through to 17, 18-year-old type adolescent individuals. The knee-jerk reaction, perhaps, is to take it out on the parents. But there are two fundamental problems, I think, that are contributing to the riots from which this new policy emanated. The first is multiculturalism, which isn't working in France pretty much in the same way, but much worse, actually, frankly, than it isn't working in the United Kingdom. And the riots to which this particular policy, from which this particular policy was born, was when that young Algerian was shot in Paris. And there was kind of inter-ethnic violence all the way from Marseille to Calais. And to put that down to a parenting issue in isolation, I think is misdiagnosing the problem. And then the other issue here, and it's something that we're guilty of in the United Kingdom, is the breakdown of core families. And in the promotion of both parents going to work, children ever increasingly going to childcare day centres, younger and younger. In the last budget, for example, Jeremy Hunt made funding available for mothers to leave their child in child daycare at the age of 9 months so they could go back to work. You've got a breakdown in families that's taking place in the West. And if you have a breakdown in families, it's the state that's bringing children up. And without the kind of familial protective blanket that children need in order to be balanced individuals as they grow up, you're going to get more of this. So I think it's a knee-jerk reaction, one I don't wholly agree with, to a problem that has much deeper roots, both in multiculturalism and in breakdown in nuclear families.
I do find this notion that if a parent works and their child goes to nursery, that somehow they're neglecting that child, and that is akin to a kind of family breakdown or a societal issue. What do you make to that? Michael, your thoughts on it all?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose to respond to a couple of things you've said there, I think the idea of France as a failure of multiculturalism is a little bit odd, because sort of when you look at multicultural policies, France is often sort of counted as the opposite of the UK. So they don't sort of celebrate and welcome different ethnicities, sort of, and the cultural symbols that come with that. They follow laïcité, which means sort of everything has to be very secular. No one is allowed to wear their religious symbols to school, for example. And I think the model...
But it hasn't worked, has it?
Well, no, but that isn't a model of... So I think the model of multiculturalism that we've had in this country, whereby, I went to a very multicultural secondary school. We sung songs for Eid, for Diwali, for Hanukkah, for everything, for Christmas, of course. And I do think there was a sort of awareness and of cultural difference, and I think that came with integration, and I don't think integration is much stronger in this country than it is in France because of our sort of multicultural policies, which I think have actually been, a positive thing. I think also sort of framing what happened in France as inter-ethnic violence is a bit strange, because I don't think there was one ethnicity fighting another, which to me is what sort of that suggests. I mean, on the family point, so the article we're working from, I think from The Times, has a passage which I find somewhat interesting. It says, the government attributed the chaos to households with an absent father and an overrun mother unable to prevent children from going out at night to set fire to public buildings and private properties. They're saying absent fathers, overrun mothers, and then the response is to send the mothers to do community service.
No,
I don't see how that's going to help.
Parents, as I understand it, it would be birth parents.
So even the absent father
would
would be brought back to the household to do community
service.
service.
They're describing broken families.
Huh?
They're describing broken families, aren't they?
But I found it interesting that you took it down the road of if you send your child to
That's an example.
nursery. So, for example, my son goes to nursery, but we're part of a two-parent family. My son is very, very, very loved. I'm a very hands-on parent.
I'm sure.
And I just find that quite interesting. Actually, as fascinating as I found that, there's also something else very fascinating going on. Let's cross live to it. Mark Francois giving an update on the so-called 5 families and how they're going to vote tonight. Listen.
About 7 minutes to. All right. On behalf of all 5. So, and I'll make that plain.
This is so ridiculous.
Tell me when you're ready to go.
The
airtime.
I can't really hear much of that, but anyway, that was Mark Francois. If you're listening and not watching, he was flanked there by, I've got to say, and I don't mean to be insulting, but I do find this whole notion...
As the 5 families in the Wilson room. We had a very well-attended meeting. We had a very constructive discussion. All colleagues were heard with respect. Everyone's point of view was given due weight and consideration. As a result of that, we have decided collectively that we cannot support the bill tonight because of its many omissions. Therefore, while it's down to every individual colleague ultimately to decide what to do, collectively, we will not be supporting it. The Prime Minister has been telling colleagues today he is prepared to entertain tightening the bill. With that aim, at the committee stage, we will aim to table amendments which would, we hope, if accepted, materially improve the bill and remove some of its weaknesses. For want of a better phrase, you might want to call it the Cash Amendment, because he'll undoubtedly be helping to draft it. We very much hope that at committee those amendments may yet be accepted. If they are not, and the bill remains unamended in that way, again, collectively, we agreed to reserve the right to vote against it at third reading. That is what collectively we have decided, and I'll ask Sir John Hayes of the Common Sense Group just to amplify that. John.
I'll continue.
Yeah.
So, you will have heard over the last few weeks both the former Home Secretary and the former Immigration Minister say that the bill in its current form isn't fit for purpose. We're persuaded of that case. However, we want to give the government a chance to listen to what they've said previously and what we're saying now. We believe that that engagement provides the opportunity to make this bill do what it says on the tin, which is provide the opportunity to affect the Rwanda policy and so fulfil the Prime Minister's pledge to stop the boats. To that end, we have come together as a group and united. It's absolutely right, as Mark says, that people come to their own judgment. That's the way this place works. But we believe that because we've had those kind of discussions, we can act broadly in a collective way and we will consider what the government do next. What they do next will determine what we do next, and that means the third reading of the bill. Thank you very much.
No, sorry, there are a few other things to hear, and then we'll answer questions. On behalf of the New Conservatives, Miriam Cates, please.
Thanks, Mark. Yes, just to echo really what Mark and John have said, we all agree that the bill is defective as it is. We don't believe it will stop the boats. There are too many opportunities for legal challenge. But we do support the principle of the bill, which is to stop the boats and do what we've promised to the electorate. So we have agreed to act collectively to not support the bill at this stage, but to be open to amendments from the government that would strengthen the bill significantly at committee stage and third reading. And so we collectively, as Mark said, reserve the right to vote against it at that point if the government was not willing to accept our amendments. But it is the 4th anniversary of the general election today. The New Conservatives group that I represent, most of us were elected for the first time on that day with a promise to take back control. We are very clear that at the moment this bill does not offer the opportunity to take back control, but we think it could do with amendments, and so that's what we're going to be pushing for.
So you're abstaining?
Yeah, just a second. Sir Jake, you're okay? Right, thank you. So Jake, right. I think hopefully you've all listened to what we've said. We are not supporting the bill. So
are you abstaining?
The bulk of us will abstain.
Do you have an idea of what sort of numbers you're talking about?
Yes. Next question.
Can you tell us?
No.
Are you confident?
Look, you haven't got long, with respect. Wait, just a sec. The votes will take place in a few minutes. The bells will ring. So none of you have got very long to wait. But I've learned, having done this for a few years, you never predict numbers before a vote. It's nothing personal.
What commitments have you had from the Prime Minister about what might happen after this?
There have been a number of discussions in the course of today with Number 10, with the Chief Whip, with others. Michael Tomlinson, who is now the Bill Minister, contacted us shortly before our meeting and agreed that he is very happy to enter into discussions between the government's lawyers and the Star Chamber's lawyers to see whether or not they and we can agree on a way forward. So there's been a lot of communication in the course of the day, but we are taking the Prime Minister at his word when he said he was prepared to see the bill tightened, and we now need to explore the envelope for that. Sorry, I want to spread this around a little bit. Who has not had a question yet?
Is this a defeat delayed then? Effectively, you were saying you'll abstain, about 40 will abstain tonight. It edges through. If there's no changes, you vote it down.
I think, to be fair, I think we've been very clear in what we were saying. So
tighten this up. One Nation will vote against it, and then it doesn't get through anyway, does it?
Let me put it like this. When we booked a room this evening, we had to take the room that we could get. You know how busy these rooms are. By chance, we ended up in the Wilson room. Harold Wilson once famously said, "A week is a long time in politics." Well, a month is a very long time. So let's pick this up again in January. We will table amendments and we will take it from there. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed.
Number 10 say that they're working within parameters. But to go beyond that would collapse the deal with Rwanda. It doesn't sound like there's that much wiggle room.
I'm not going to preempt a negotiation that's just about to start. Thank you very much.
Well, there you go. Ooh, how dramatic. Bit of drama. That was Marc Francois there, speaking on behalf of the so-called 5 families, saying that they are essentially going to vote against or perhaps abstain. Who knows? Time will tell what they're all going to do. But they're not going to support Rishi Sunak's Rwanda bill. Richard Tice, Reform UK, what do you make to this?
It's extraordinary, isn't it, them describing themselves as the 5 families, Michelle. It's sort of like a contradiction in terms.
It's not extraordinary, it's weird.
It's a bit weird, I must say. MPs describing themselves as a family, not supporting the Prime Minister. That's the certainty of this. It appears that the bulk of the total number of MPs within those 5 families, we're not actually sure how many MPs that is in total because there seems to be some duplication. But the maths that I've done is that if 10 MPs vote against and about 37 abstain, then it would fail. if about 20 vote against and 17 abstain, then it would fail. So there's a sort of matrix here of numbers, assuming that everybody votes, and we know that some people have been flying from around the world to get back for the evening to vote and then disappear again.
If you're sitting at home going, Michelle, what's going on? Who are these 5 families? What's all occurring? Let me just help you out. So the ERG, you've got the New Conservatives, the Conservative Growth Group, that of course was the one that was formed after Liz Truss, the New Conservative, of course, the Red Wall, and then the Common Sense Group. So you've got the New Conservatives, the ERG, the Northern Research Group, the Conservative Growth Group, and the Common Sense Group. Your 5 families, ladies and gents, you're welcome. Michael Walker, what do you make to it all?
I just think the whole thing is a joke. I mean, you've got the 5 families getting advice from the Star Chamber. It's like The Godfather crossed with Star Wars, and they're all just arguing over a policy which everyone knows isn't going to work anyway, because they all want a bit of screen time, ideally, so they have a bit more leverage in the next Tory election after they've lost a general election. So I think the whole thing is a joke. I mean, the elephant in the room is that Rwanda policy, whether or not it passes, isn't going to work, isn't going to have the desired effect. So this is all just a talking shop and Mark Francois wanting to look like a gangster on live television.
It is extraordinary grandstanding, and as you say, I think most of the country who focuses on this, or listening at all and forming their own common sense judgment, doesn't think it's a deterrent, doesn't think even if it passed, being the 3rd bill that supposedly would stop the boats, and no one really thinks it will, except a couple of hundred of Conservative MPs. That's the sort of strange situation we're in, and it's a bizarre collection, isn't it, of grandstanding, egos, making everybody very important.
It's not good enough, is what it is. People don't take to the polls, and bearing in mind, many people don't take to the polls literally because they're not politically engaged. And when you are politically engaged, the last thing that you want and you expect from the parties that you vote in is infighting and constant division and constant uncertainty and constant going around and around in circles. Do you think this bill is going to pass?
I think it will just pass, yes. I think that a lot of people are sort of grandstanding and will abstain. So I think it'll pass, but I don't think it'll make any difference at all.
Do you think it'll pass?
I think it will pass. I think they're fighting over the future of the Conservative Party, but no one wants to go into the next general election as Conservative leader, so they're going to leave it for Rishi Sunak. They'll let him lose, and then they'll fight over the scraps afterwards.
Let's just devil's advocate then. If it doesn't pass, what then?
That is very, very serious for the Prime Minister, because he will look weak, he's lost all confidence. His core policy to stop the boats, one of his 5 pledges, has essentially not got the confidence of his own MPs. He is in deep, deep trouble.
Surely we can't have I don't want to go all Brenda from Bristol, and I certainly can't do the accent. My accent is bad enough as it is. You know, we surely can't have another Tory leader, surely.
Well, so I think if he loses this, then Labour will call a vote of no confidence, but probably Rishi Sunak will win that, because Tory MPs don't really want a general election just yet. So I can't see that they're stupid enough to have another Tory leader before the next general election.
I think that is agreed. It's how long, if he lost it, how long could he seriously hold a government together before having to go to the country, probably sooner rather than later. That, I think, would herald more likely a spring election.
What do you think? Do you want to have a next election? Are you one of them that's sitting there at home saying, actually, it's time for that? That is indeed what we want. I mean, let's have a look. I want to bring in some of my viewers. Rule tonight, you are actually quite divided on this. Mark Francois, he basically is an attention seeker, loves to be in the limelight. The 5 families, what do these guys think they are? The mafia? Well, actually, I do think it is. That is where that whole kind of sentiment of being the 5 families, I think that descriptive term does somewhat hat back, come from the mafia. I mean, I just feel a little bit sad, actually, because I feel a lot of people that were not politically engaged, they did buy into this kind of momentous wave of Boris Johnson. You know, a lot of people, they did vote Brexit because they wanted control of immigration, and they will feel deeply frustrated by what many would argue are just kind of the politics, internal politics, frustrating the will of the people.
And the point is, you've now got, this is the 3rd bill. We've got 2 acts that have been introduced by this government. The Nationality and Borders Act, the Illegal Migration Act, that hasn't stopped the boats. They then say this will stop the boats, and I think eventually people just lose trust and say, well, if you can't get it right first or second time, why should I believe you 3rd time?
Why should they believe fair time? What do you think?
Well, I think picking Stop the Boats as one of Rishi Sunak's sort of main priorities was always a mistake. One, because it's not that many people, it's not a huge threat to the country, right? The big issue in terms of migration is legal migration, which, by the way, is propping up our university system and our social care system. So, to me, it seemed like a silly target to begin with, and now this is just grandstanding. This is just them trying to keep this in the headlines because they don't want us to talk about the NHS crisis, which is about to hit, or the fact that wages have been stagnating for 20 years.
Mark says, Michelle, it feels to me that this country is just not a democratic country. Many people are asking, since when did the mafia take over Parliament? That is a sentiment that comes through again. Yvonne says, here we are, it's like being in limbo yet again. Let's cross live, shall we, to our politics guru, our political editor, with the very latest reaction. Christopher Hope, good evening to you. Wowzers, what's your reaction to what we've just seen?
Well, wow, Dewbs, I've been in Portcullis House for that interview there with Mark Francois. He said that we will abstain from the vote. Now, he's talking on behalf of 5 families, the Northern Research Group of Tory MPs, the Common Sense Group, the New Conservative Group, the Northern Research Group, and Conservative Future. Now, those 5 groups met tonight. There's around 100 Tory MPs in that group who met. Now, Mr. Francois says, as a group, we're going to abstain. The risk for the government right now, we'll know in half an hour, is if all those MPs abstain, the Rwanda bill falls tonight. The government is defeated on the first, second reading in Parliament since 1986. It will be a historic defeat, a disaster for the Prime Minister, and will probably lead to a vote of no confidence in the government. An opportunistic one, if you like, from the Labour Party. That's where we are tonight at 7 p.m. on GB News. It's a big risk for the government. They've been twisting arms all day. Rishi Sunak, our freshman COVID inquiry yesterday, has been meeting with people trying to work out how can you come round. The meeting, a dawn meeting with around 20 members of the New Conservatives, 2019 young MPs, trying to find to reshape the party's future. It's very, very clear from an interview I carried out early today for GB News with Richard Holden, the party chairman. They want to try and offer amendments to MPs, and that's what's tempted the so-called 5 families grouping of right-wing Tories to not vote against the government, but simply vote to abstain. That means that when it gets to report stage, probably next month, back in the House of Commons behind me, they will offer up amendments, as they would see it, to strengthen the bill. The problem that BM's got is if they accept those amendments to strengthen the bill, then it's going to be then the left of the party, the One Nation caucus won't accept it. It is highly risky, highly dangerous. Big Ben chiming behind me at 7 p.m. That means that the votes are happening now. We'll see 3 votes. The big result we're expecting on GB News at 7:30 p.m. Stay tuned.
And a very good evening. Yes, I'm not Michelle Dewberry. It's now 7 o'clock. It's Farage, and I'm Richard Tice. Thank you, Christopher Hope, for that analysis. It is hard to keep up with what is going on. We can't even really know exactly how many MPs, Tory MPs, are within this sort of mafia-like sounding group of 5 families, for heaven's sake. We're trying to get to all of that throughout the evening. But if the bulk of them abstain like that, then we could be in for a bit of a shock this evening. Anything could happen. First of all, before we get into my guests and analyse all of this, I'm going to pass you to Polly Middlehurst in the GB newsroom.
Richard, thank you, and good evening to you. It is indeed an eventful evening in Westminster tonight. If you've been following our programmes, the Prime Minister